Welcome to the Digital Identity Digest, the audio companion to the blog at Spherical Cow Consulting. I'm Heather Flanagan, and every week I break down interesting topics in the field of digital identity, from credentials and standards to browser weirdness and policy twists. If you work with digital identity but don't have time to follow every specification or hype cycle, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. Suggesting that technical standards are a political thing is a really good way to make certain kinds of standards people, which would be most of them, very uncomfortable. I mean, they're not always angry exactly, but they're more like disappointed, as if someone tracked mud across their data center floor. Now, the objection usually goes something like this, right? Standards are technical work. They define formats, protocols, interfaces, flows, and operational expectations. They are not legislation. They are not party platforms. They are not manifestos. The work is supposed to be neutral. And I get that, right? I share that instinct. I understand it. But standards development organizations should not become proxy legislatures. They are very bad at doing that. And the world already has legislatures, many of which are also bad at that, but at least have the decency to be designed for purpose. But not partisan is not the same as not political, and that distinction really matters, right? Technical standards have never been outside politics in the broader sense of the word. They shape who can communicate, who can interoperate, who can be observed, who can be excluded, who can assert authority, who has to trust whom, and who gets to decide when something has gone horribly wrong. That's not party politics. That's not campaign politics. That's politics in the older and much more ordinary sense, the ordering relationships among people, institutions, and power. And standards do that all the time. The internet's self image is built around openness and interoperability and a certain kind of neutrality. They are very real technical principles, but they are also value choices. A network that allows many kinds of endpoints, applications, operators, and communities to connect without prior permission is not a value free intervention. It embodies a theory of coordination. It says that broad communication should be possible, even when the parties at the edge are different, inconvenient, commercially threatening, or politically irritating, right? It's an architectural goal as much as it is a political statement. And the same is true when a standards community says that the internet is for end users. And that sounds pretty obvious until the interests of end users conflict with the interests of network operators, governments, platforms, vendors, publishers, or other intermediaries. I mean, at that point, saying for end users is no longer, a design choice. It's a priority rule and a value. Now, the W3C says this more plainly than many communities do. The Web Platform Design Principles starts with put user needs first. That's the priority of constituencies that explicitly ranks user needs above the needs of web page authors, user agent implementers, specification writers, and what we call theoretical purity, right? This is not a minor process preference, right? It is a governance claim embedded in technical design guidance. And whenever there's a trade off, the answer is not supposed to be, well, whatever is most elegant, or whatever is easiest for the largest implementer, or whatever keeps the specifications shortest, right? The stated priority is the user. And that's a value, and it's a good one in my opinion, but it is still a value. Now, we've been more comfortable admitting the consequences of standards work in some areas than others. Security considerations are required because we know a specification can create risk. Privacy considerations exist because we know protocol design can expose people, it can correlate them and identify them, or make surveillance easier, right? There was an RFC several years ago called Pervasive Monitoring as an Attack that is a technical assessment, but no one should pretend it has no relationship to state power, corporate power, or the politics of surveillance. A decision not to build wiretapping requirements into internet standards is an engineering boundary. It is also a statement about what kinds of forum the IETF is, for example, and what kinds of government requirements it will not absorb into its core work. These are not embarrassing exceptions to the purity of technical standards, right? They are evidence that technical work has consequences, and mature standards processes eventually find ways to name these consequences. The problem is that we often reserve that clarity for a very small set of familiar categories. Security? Yep, we've got a section for that. Privacy? Increasingly, yes, we have a section for that too. Internationalization, accessibility, operational considerations? Sometimes, depending on the community and the document. But when the question becomes more obviously entangled with law or public policy, everyone gets very twitchy. Take, for example, end to end encryption. Can a government require a technical capability to interrupt, inspect, or bypass end-to-end encryption? Some governments will say absolutely yes. Many technologists will say absolutely no, because a system that allows third party interruption is not providing the same security property anymore. That answer is very technically grounded, but it is also politically meaningful. It prioritizes confidentiality, user security, and resistance to compelled access over certain models of law enforcement access. That doesn't make the technologist a legislator. It does mean that the technical answer has public consequences, right? Age assurance is another useful example, precisely because it's such a mess. Can age be verified under specific circumstances? Well, yes, depending on what verified means, what level of assurance is required, what attribute is disclosed, who performs the check, whether identity is bound to the transaction, whether the relying party learns anything more than it needs, whether the system creating the tracking infrastructure exists, and whether the people affected have realistic alternatives. There is plenty of technology in that list, and there is nothing politically neutral about it. A standard can make one implementation easier and another harder. It can make surveillance expensive or cheap. It can require disclosure or enable selective disclosure. It can support anonymity, pseudonymity, verified attributes, organizational authority, delegation, parental approval, platform accountability, or some awkward combination of all the above. Each of those design choices reflects a view about risk and legitimacy, right? The standard may not decide the law, but it can absolutely decide which laws are easy to implement, which are hard to implement, and which are technically incoherent. And that's where that old comforting blanket of we are open and neutral starts to fray a bit. We're open to who exactly? Neutral among which parties? Neutral about what kinds of harm? Neutral between the person being monitored and the institution doing the monitoring? Neutral between a child's access to information and a regulator's demand for age gating? But I'm not trying to put in like gotcha questions, all right? These are questions that appear as soon as the technical architecture actually meets society, which is rather rude of society, but it's hardly a new thing, right? The traditional standards move is to say we build the mechanisms, not the policy. There's value in that discipline. It does keep technical forums from pretending they can settle every moral and legal dispute. It also keeps specifications from becoming unreadable monuments to every unresolved argument in the room. But the we build mechanisms, not policy, can become an evasion when the mechanisms only work under one policy model, right? A protocol that assumes cross border reachability has something to say about fragmentation, whether or not the authors intended to make a geopolitical point or not. A credential format that assumes stable authoritative issuers has something to say about institutional trust. A discovery mechanism, I like those, right? Discovery mechanisms that assume public metadata has something to say about privacy and correlation. And the list really kind of just goes on, right? The specification does not become non-political just because the political assumptions are implicit. And in fact, implicit politics may be the worst kind for standards work. It allows everyone to claim neutrality while baking in a model of the world that may not survive contact with deployment. Then, when regulators, courts, companies, civil society groups, or government respond poorly, the technical community is shocked to discover that other people notice consequences. This isn't a call for every working group meeting to become a seminar in political theory. That would be very cruel, and frankly, the coffee is not good enough. But it is a call for more honesty about the values already present in the work. When a standards community says that the internet is for end users, that's a value. When the W3C says users' needs should come before authors, implementers, specification writers, and theoretical purity, that's also a value. When a standards body says pervasive monitoring should be mitigated, that's a value. When it refuses to design wiretapping into control protocols, when it requires security considerations and privacy considerations, right? These are admissions that technical specifications can create conditions for harm. Good. Let's do more of that. More of that recognition, right? The alternative is not neutrality. The alternative is unmanaged politics. Politics handled by market dominance, regulatory pressure, regional fragmentation, procurement requirements, private platform rules, and after the fact outrage. Those forces will not politely wait outside the standards process because the agenda said it's a technical discussion. They're already in the room. Sometimes they're wearing a government badge. Sometimes they're wearing a corporate badge. Sometimes they are represented by an architectural assumption no one thought to question. So the question is not whether standards bodies themselves should become political, because they already are. in the sense that they make decisions that affect the relationships between people, institutions, and power. The question is whether they can remain technically credible while becoming more explicit about those decisions. I think they can. More than that, I think they have to. The internet is fragmenting under pressure from regulation, national sovereignty claims, platform consolidation, security failures, and incompatible views of trust and safety. Pretending that an open and neutral architecture will naturally prevail because it is technically elegant is not a strategy. It's kind of like nostalgia that you put a packet header on. At the same time, abandoning openness and neutrality as naive myths would be a mistake, right? They've never been perfect descriptions of reality, but they do remain useful commitments. The work is now not to pretend that everything is value free, that sense of neutrality. The work is to say what our specifications require under present conditions. That may mean being explicit when a design product protects end users over intermediaries. It may mean saying when a requirement would create an unacceptable surveillance risk, though, of course, unacceptable to whom is sort of an open question. It may mean admitting that a globally interoperable standard cannot satisfy every national policy demand without ceasing to be globally interoperable. And you know what? That's going to make some of our conversations a lot harder. Oh well. Standards work has always depended on disciplined disagreement. The point is not to remove politics from the room. The point is to prevent unexamined politics from hiding inside our architectures until it becomes infrastructure. Technical purity is comforting to a lot of people, but it's also too small for the world our standards now inhabit. We do not need standards bodies to become partisan actors, but we do need them to stop treating values as contamination, right? Openness, interoperability, privacy, security, user agency, and resistance to fragmentation are not external to work. They are part of our work. They are our values, and we should be very, very, very explicit about that. If we cannot say that plainly, someone else will define those values for us, probably in a venue with worse process, less technical competence, and far more confidence. That would be unfortunate, but it's also a very entirely predictable reality if you look at how things are going. And with that cheerful note, let's see what I talk about next week. I hope you come back. And that's it for this week's episode of the Digital Identity Digest. If it helps make things a little clearer, or at least a little more interesting, share it with a friend or colleague and connect with me on LinkedIn at HL Flanagan. And if you enjoyed the show, do be sure to subscribe and leave me a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also find the written full post at sphericalcowconsulting.com. Now stay curious, stay engaged, and let's get these conversations going.